Emerging from the darkness of the tunnel, the train reveals the shifting scenery waiting outside the window. Alan watches in awe as the landscape transforms into a world of pure, unadulterated white, a stark contrast to the royal capital he left behind. The train speeds toward the northern region, carrying him to the main residence of the Howard Duchy where he will begin his work as a home tutor. In a crushing meeting at the Royal Academy laboratory, the professor informs Alan that he has failed the exam to become a court magician. Alan accepts the life-changing news with a resigned sigh, barely reacting to the failure. Reflecting on his performance, he realizes that while his writing test was flawless, his lack of practical magic skills was his ultimate downfall. The professor attempts to console him with the idiom that there is always a bigger fish in the sea. Desperate for a path forward, Alan asks the professor if there are any other jobs available to him right now. The professor is confused, noting that Alan should have enough money to last until graduation without working. He urges Alan to appreciate himself more, believing he could easily find work in the capital if he truly wished to stay. Alan lowers his gaze, silently contemplating his mentor's advice. Humble to a fault, Alan insists that there are countless people out there far more amazing than he is. The professor expresses deep regret, noting that Alan and Miss Lydia were truly the finest students he ever had in his long career. With a selfless smile, Alan asks the professor to take care of Lydia, certain that she passed the exam he failed. Changing the subject, the professor offers a handsome-paying tutoring job for the daughter of an old friend until spring. Alan repeats the words, surprised by the sudden offer of becoming a home tutor. Recalling his experience tutoring his difficult frenemy, he confidently accepts, thinking no one could be more egoistic than her. His eyes sparkling with determination, he tells the professor to proceed with the arrangement by all means. The professor immediately picks up the phone to strike while the iron is hot, leaving Alan to deduce the client is from a wealthy household. As the conversation starts, a sudden wave of dread washes over Alan. The professor enthusiastically introduces Alan over the phone as the brilliant kid he had been bragging about. He hands the receiver to a stunned Alan to introduce himself immediately. The professor drops the bombshell that the student is Tina, the endearing daughter of the prestigious Howard Duchy. He whispers that he will keep this arrangement a secret from Lydia for the time being. The Howard Duchy is revealed to be one of the 4 Archduke houses, possessing royal blood and a rumored right to the throne. Alan realizes with dawning horror that tutoring a duchess is a monumental burden. Panic sets in as his eyes widen, unable to process the magnitude of the task. The professor insists it is a job fit for him, while Alan realizes she is a duchess just like his previous student. The professor refuses to let him decline, framing it as tough love to prevent such excellent talent from rotting away in the countryside, despite Alan's humble refusal. Alan protests that he isn't seeking fame, insisting it is a miracle he even made it this far in life. The professor smiles knowingly, telling Alan that his extreme humility is simultaneously his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. Confident in his scheming, the professor declares with a smirk that he knows for a fact Alan will return to the royal capital in no time. Defeated, Alan agrees to the arrangement but sheepishly asks to borrow money for the train fare. The professor reveals he has already prepared a commemorative bento and a first-class ticket for a train departing at noon. Realization dawns on Alan's face as he accuses the professor of setting him up from the very beginning. Laughing off the accusation, the professor claims he simply had to send his beloved child away to experience life's surprises. In hindsight, Alan reasons that he couldn't retire to the countryside without money, resolving to do his best since he accepted the job. Arriving in the freezing north, Alan shivers, regretting that he didn't see through the professor's guile sooner. A voice calls out from the crowd, asking if he is perhaps Alan Sama. Alan turns to the stranger and confirms his identity. The man introduces himself as Graham, the head butler of the Duke Howard household. Graham steps aside to reveal a shy young girl hiding behind him, introducing her as Ellie, a maid in training. Alan stares in shock, wondering how a girl this young could possibly be working as a maid. Graham swiftly intercepts Alan's luggage, insisting that carrying it is his duty as a butler despite Alan's protests. The butler adds that they have brought a car, prompting Alan to accept the offer. Alan marvels at the vehicle and the snowy landscape, noting that the Ducal household is quick to acquire new technologies like cars. Graham remarks that the current snow is light, warning that people will completely hold themselves up once the true winter season arrives. Alan expresses surprise that he was recognized given his lack of unique traits, but Graham counters that it would be harder to miss him. Confused by the remark, Alan asks Graham to clarify what he means. Graham explains that Lord Walter Howard and the professor are old friends who frequently drink together. Alan sighs, assuming the professor has been entertaining the Duke with his embarrassing and hilarious stories. Correcting him, Graham reveals that the professor has actually been bragging about him, allowing the butler to recognize Alan at a single glance. Standing before the car, Graham suggests that since it is cramped, the young maid Ellie should sit on Alan's lap. Alan panics and refuses, arguing that she would hate sitting on a stranger's lap and that they should just huddle together. Flustered, he insists there is absolutely no need for such unnecessary consideration. Ellie suddenly tugs on Graham's coat, staring intently at the adults with a silent intensity. Graham wipes sweat from his brow while looking awkwardly at Alan, caught between the girl's silent demand and the guest's refusal. The butler vaguely insists that Ellie mentioned it too, implying this is her wish. Alan hesitates, unsure how to respond to the strange atmosphere. Ellie looks up at him with pleading eyes, softly asking if she isn't allowed to sit there. Struck by her gaze, Alan freezes, unable to maintain his refusal against such an expression. Defeated by her cuteness, he extends his hand and invites her up, though he warns his lap might not be comfortable. Ellie climbs onto his lap with a polite "excuse me," settling in as the car prepares to depart. As Graham drives, he silently worries about how light the girl sitting on Alan's lap feels, questioning if she has been eating properly. In the cramped back seat, Alan finds himself face to face with the quiet girl, observing her closely. His sharp eyes catch a detail others might miss, noting that her bow is embroidered with expensive platinum thread. He analyzes her attire further, realizing the high-quality gown doesn't fit her and she seems completely unaccustomed to wearing a maid's uniform. Alan notices the girl trembling slightly, realizing the biting cold is getting to her. He watches her shivering form, her cheeks flushed as she endures the freezing temperature. Smiling warmly at her plight, he decides to intervene to make the ride more comfortable. He politely asks the driver for permission to use a little bit of magic inside the vehicle. Graham is surprised by the request as Alan explains he intends to use temperature manipulation. Alan clarifies that he will delicately adjust fire, water, and wind attributes to warm the air without causing an explosion, calling it just a little trick. He casts the spell with incredible precision, gradually warming the air and leaving both Graham and the girl in awe of his control. Graham drives on, realizing that the rumors about this young tutor's skills were not just true, but understated. With the atmosphere warmed, Alan addresses Graham while the girl relaxes against his chest. He questions the timing of his employment, asking why the Duke hired a tutor just 3 months before the royal capital's entrance exam. Graham glances back in surprise, asking if the professor truly didn't tell him anything about the situation. Alan confirms with a wry smile that his mentor left him completely in the dark. Graham sighs, realizing the professor withheld the information for his own twisted amusement. The girl suddenly interrupts, flustered and apologetic, worrying that the magic might have made the car too hot. The car arrives at the destination, revealing the sprawling and majestic estate of the Howard Duchy. Graham stops the vehicle and thanks Alan for making the long trip. Alan politely returns the thanks, while the girl struggles clumsily to exit the car. Seeing her difficulty, Alan offers to help her down. Before she can react, he sweeps her up into his arms, eliciting a startled cry. He lifts her out of the carriage effortlessly, holding her securely as she squeaks in surprise. He gently sets her down onto the snowy ground, ensuring she lands safely. Alan apologizes for the uncomfortable ride, bowing his head respectfully as she tries to deny it. He begins to address her as Ellie, but abruptly stops himself mid-sentence. Correcting his tone, he looks her in the eye and addresses her properly as Your Highness. Alan laughs at her shocked expression, admitting that her disguise was very obvious and he noticed it immediately. Blushing furiously, she stammers, asking how he figured it out and if he knew since they met at the station. Alan lists the clues. Her borrowed uniform was the wrong size, her overcoat was too high quality, and only a VIP would disguise themselves to inspect a tutor. He points to the final piece of evidence, noting that her pure white ribbon is the unmistakable sign of her noble status. Alan inspects the girl's attire, noting that her shoes are of a quality rarely seen even in the royal capital, confirming his suspicions about her identity. The girl buries her face in her scarf, overwhelmed with embarrassment at being so easily seen through. Seizing the moment, the trio hurries out of the cold and steps into the warmth of the mansion's entrance. Graham apologizes profusely for the deception, explaining that the young lady insisted on coming along, while Alan realizes he left his scarf behind. They proceed through the corridors, the vastness of the estate becoming apparent with every step. Entering the main hall, they walk beneath a massive chandelier that illuminates the grandeur of the Howard household. Alan observes the advanced infrastructure, impressed by the triple-layered glass and the hot water plumbing system keeping the interior warm. Graham instructs the girl, whom he calls Ellie, to take the luggage to Alan's room, and she responds with a nervous stammer. In her haste, she trips, but Alan reacts instantly to catch her before she hits the ground, eliciting a startled cry. Flustered and trembling, she looks up at him with teary eyes, stammering out a terrified apology. Graham reprimands her sternly, asking how many times she must be told not to run inside the mansion. The butler sighs, asking how long she intends to cling to their guest, causing her to shriek and jump away. Alan hands her his bag and jacket with a gentle smile, telling her he is simply glad she wasn't hurt. She accepts the items with renewed energy, shouting that he can leave it to her. Alan watches her with a kind expression, his natural charm evident in his gaze. Overwhelmed by the interaction, she turns and bolts down the hallway, steam practically rising from her head. Before she fully departs, Alan instinctively reaches out and pats her on the head. She freezes with swirling eyes, letting out a confused sound. Realizing what he did, Alan smiles sheepishly while the girl looks like she might overheat and explode. He quickly apologizes, explaining that he acted out of habit because he usually does that to his sister. Graham watches the scene with a knowing look, recalling the professor's description of Alan. The butler internally confirms the professor's words. Alan is a natural-born lady killer. Alan sweats nervously, protesting that it's a false accusation and he is just used to treating younger people that way. Dismissing the excuse, Graham announces that the master is waiting and instructs Alan to enter the room alone. Alan composes himself and steps through the large double doors. Inside, he meets Walter Howard, who greets him warmly, stating that he feels they aren't strangers thanks to the professor's stories. Alan introduces himself formally, realizing this is the final interview for his position. He immediately brings up the lack of information, confessing that the professor told him nothing other than the student's name and goal. Furious, Walter vows to kick the professor's ass the next time they meet, a sentiment Alan eagerly shares. Calming down, Walter acknowledges that Alan's reaction confirms he suspects special circumstances regarding the job. He confirms his wish for Alan to tutor Tina until spring, but reveals a crucial correction regarding her enrollment. Walter turns to look at his daughter outside the window, stating bluntly that Tina cannot use magic at all. Alan stands in silence, processing the heavy implication of those words. Walter turns back with a serious expression, laying out his true directive for the tutorship. He declares that his request is not to help her pass, but to make Tina give up on enrolling in the Royal Academy entirely. Walter drops the bombshell that his daughter possesses absolutely no magical talent, commanding Alan to use his position to make Tina give up on enrolling in the academy. Stunned by the harsh directive, Alan stands in silence, processing the Duke's ruthless request regarding his own child. Walter explains that the Howard household has governed the North since the kingdom's founding, shouldering a heavy legacy of leadership. He describes the region with grim pride, noting that while he loves his land, it is an undeniably harsh place for any man to survive. Due to constant border conflicts, foreign nations view the Howard house as a terrifying military powerhouse built on endless battles. Walter reveals his family struggles, mentioning his rebellious eldest daughter, his late wife, and his refusal to remarry, leaving him with only 2 heirs. He asserts that Tina is too soft to become a soldier or master the household's secret ice magic, dismissing her potential as a warrior. With a heavy heart, he declares that the era of Duke Howard the Militant will end with his generation. He believes Tina would be happier choosing a different path, but fears her overwhelming sense of responsibility blinds her to this truth. Alan recalls that the Royal Academy is a prestigious institution where graduation is mandatory for high-ranking nobles and government officials. Seeking clarification on the anomaly, Alan asks about the specific claim that Tina has absolutely no talent in magic. Walter confirms with a stern expression that he means those words exactly as they sound, leaving no room for interpretation. He details her incompetence, stating that despite their ice affinity, she cannot conjure even a simple pebble or flame at the age of 13. The irony is cruel, as Walter reveals she actually possesses an immense amount of mana that surpasses both him and her sister. Alan recognizes the rare condition of unawakened potential and argues that the Academy accepts students with talents in other fields. Walter admits the professor made the same argument, but he maintains that crushing her hope now is unnecessary mercy compared to future failure. He refuses to let his daughter enroll as a bummer with questionable skills, declaring that the Royal Academy is not a charity institution. Alan realizes with a nervous sweat that the Duke is fully aware of his past, specifically regarding the irregular students he is associated with. Walter recounts how Alan tutored Lydia, the sword princess, who passed the exam solely on swordsmanship despite her magical ineptitude. He identifies both Alan and Lydia as abnormalities who graduated in a single year, proving he has done his homework on the tutor. Alan humbly deflects the praise, claiming he was merely dragged into Lydia's antics rather than being a proper guide. Trying to pivot back to the job, Alan questions the logic of making Tina give up despite her strong desire to enroll. Walter falls silent, his sharp gaze fixing on Alan as he considers his next move regarding the stubborn tutor. Breaking the tension, Walter invites Alan to follow him, stating there is something specific he needs to see. They stand before a massive structure with glass windows, looming impressively against the winter sky. Alan marvels at the facility, noting it is a greenhouse of a scale unrivaled even in the royal capital. Walter looks at the structure with a softened expression, revealing a different side to his stern demeanor. He reveals that this entire facility is the result of his daughter's dedicated research. Alan is stunned to realize that Her Highness Tina is responsible for such an impressive feat of agriculture. Walter explains that Tina has been obsessed with plants since childhood, learning from her late mother's books before he even knew. He built this sanctuary so she could pursue her passion freely, defying the land's long winters and short springs. Alan gazes at the greenhouse, internally commenting on the immense aristocrat power required to build such a facility for a mere hobby. Walter gazes at the blooming flowers, approving of his daughter's extraordinary dedication to growing crops in their harsh, snowy climate. He reasons that if Tina continues her research, the duchy could produce crops for export, significantly bolstering their economy. Furious at the professor's manipulation, Walter laments the dilemma of a daughter sacrificing her passion for duty while he secretly wishes she would stay. Alan lets out a heavy sigh, realizing the complicated family dynamic he has just stepped into. Breaking the silence, Alan politely asks the Duke for permission to ask a single question regarding the situation. While sympathizing with Walter's feelings, Alan asserts his belief that Her Highness should ultimately pursue the path she desires. He proposes a wager, if Tina defies the odds to learn magic and meets the strict requirements for the Royal Academy. Alan demands that Walter must allow her to enroll if she still wishes to do so by the time spring arrives. Walter laughs at the audacious proposal, calling Alan bold and daring for accepting such a disadvantageous duty. Accepting the terms, Walter warns that he will make her give up if she shows no results, revealing that Tina already knows about Alan's history with Lydia. Swearing on his late wife's name, the Duke vows to do anything in his power to support Tina if she actually manages to use magic. Alan smiles confidently, accepting the challenge with a look of determination. He finds the prospect of teaching a girl with zero magical talent to be an exciting venture into the unknown. Recalling his title as the Sword Princess Brain, Alan vows to use his intellect to solve this impossible problem. Meanwhile, Ellie helps Tina prepare for dinner, assuring her mistress that she looks gorgeous in any dress. Tina anxiously selects a darker dress, hoping the somber color will make her appear more diligent to her new tutor. She fidgets nervously, her confidence wavering as she overthinks her first formal meeting. Ellie watches her warm-heartedly, smiling gently at her mistress's adorable anxiety. Realizing the time, Ellie panics and announces that they must hurry to the dining hall immediately. In the dining hall, Walter raises his glass for a boisterous toast to welcome their guest from afar. The table groans under the weight of a hearty feast, showcasing the rich, rustic cuisine of the north. Alan is moved to near tears by the delicious meat, lamenting the week he survived on nothing but bread and soup as a poor student. Enjoying the meal, he asks if it is common practice for the entire household to eat together like this. The servants confirm it is a good northern tradition where everyone eats the same ingredients as the common folk. Walter tries to pour wine for Alan, insisting that at 17 years old he is too old to refuse a drink. Alan politely declines the alcohol, explaining that he must retire early to prepare for their first class tomorrow. Walter shrugs off the rejection and happily drinks for both of them, while Alan savors the seasoned soup. The heavy wooden doors creak open, drawing the room's attention to the late arrivals. Tina and Ellie step into the dining hall, breathless and flustered from their rush. Walter waves them over, beckoning both his daughter and the maid to join the table. The Duke formally introduces Alan as the new home tutor who will begin his instruction the very next day. Tina curtsies elegantly, introducing herself as Tina Howard and expressing her pleasure to work with him. Alan bows politely, formally introducing himself to the young noblewoman and expressing his pleasure to work with her. Ellie's eyes widen in horror as she realizes the man she rode in the car with is their new tutor, stammering to ask if he was cold. Panic overtakes the maid as she flushes a deep red, screaming that there are too many things they need to talk about right now. While Ellie steams with embarrassment, Tina blushes silently, and Alan finds their flushed expressions quite amusing. Alan's gaze sharpens as he shifts his focus from the comedy to a serious observation of his new student. Observing Tina closely, he confirms the anomaly, noting that the girl possesses an enormous amount of mana swirling within her. Turning to the Duke, Alan asks if he can resolve the situation provided he finds the specific trigger needed to unlock her potential. The Duke grants permission for familiarity, instructing Alan to simply call him Walter. Tina requests to be called by her name as well, then anxiously asks if she will be his sole student. Alan praises her sharp intuition, admitting he was just about to address that very topic. He calls out Ellie's name, causing the maid to stiffen and respond with a high-pitched squeak. Alan reveals that Ellie is Graham's granddaughter and the sole successor to the Walker household, a family that has long supported the Howards. Walter confirms that Graham has given his approval, formally requesting Alan to take Ellie under his wing as well. As Ellie stands frozen, Tina realizes the implication and asks if her maid will also be entering the Royal Academy. Ellie hangs her head, confessing she is not good at magic and fears she will only be a burden to them. Alan asks Ellie a question, internally resolving that if she has the will to move forward, he only needs to clear the way for her. Startled by the sudden attention, Ellie shouts a loud affirmation before she can process her own words. She instantly stiffens into a statue, leaving Alan wondering how to handle such extreme tension. Acting on instinct to calm her down, Alan reaches out his hand toward her head. He gently pats the steaming maid, asking what she truly wants to do now that her master has given permission. Tina intervenes with passion, declaring that Ellie is her exclusive maid and she wants to go to the academy together. Accepting the arrangement, Alan tells the maid to drop the formalities and call him Alan, though she stammers out a compromise. He insists on being called by his name, prompting a flustered Ellie to try calling him Alan Sensei instead. Tina joins in, prohibiting him from using honorifics for her and deciding to call him Sensei as well. Alan smiles at his two new students, formally accepting the challenge to work with both Tina and Ellie starting tomorrow. A silent moment hangs in the air before the story resumes with the start of a new chapter. With a view of a quiet desk where a notebook and glasses rest in anticipation. A sharp knock breaks the silence, prompting the occupant to calmly grant permission to enter. Ellie bursts into the room, stammering an apology as she announces she is there to pick him up for Tina. Alan politely hands over his luggage with thanks, causing Ellie to stutter that she will carry it for him. Flustered by his gratitude, Ellie insists that carrying his burden is merely her job as a maid and nothing more. The two walk down the long, silent corridor together, the sound of their footsteps filling the hall. Alan walks with a relaxed smile while Ellie moves beside him, visibly tense and glancing nervously at him. Noticing her stiff behavior, Alan hums in thought as he observes her hesitation. He internally concludes that the maid is still wary of him despite their previous interactions. Offering a wry smile, Alan hopes that she will eventually get used to his presence. They arrive at the destination, which Alan recognizes as the same location from yesterday. Standing before the cracked wall, Ellie announces that the young lady is waiting inside. Ellie hesitates, stumbling over her words before timidly addressing him as Alan Sensei. She apologizes profusely, explaining that she cannot attend class today due to her work duties. Alan readily accepts this and hands her a test paper, explaining that today's agenda is just an academic mock exam anyway. Ellie breathes a visible sigh of relief as she accepts the paper from him. Without warning, Alan reaches out and pats her head, causing her to shriek in surprise. He continues to stroke her head gently while she makes confused, flustered noises under his hand. Realizing his mistake, Alan stops and apologizes, remembering she didn't like this yesterday there. Alan thanks her for her help and turns to leave, missing Ellie's quiet admission that she didn't hate the contact. Walking into the greenhouse, Alan notes that the environment is maintained at a comfortable temperature. He approaches a private room within the greenhouse, remarking on the extravagance before knocking on the door. Tina calls out from inside, informing him that the door is unlocked and he may enter. Alan enters to find Tina sitting elegantly at a table surrounded by tall bookshelves. Scanning the shelves, he is shocked to find them full of expensive, rare books and decides to ignore the cost. Although tempted to read them immediately, Alan refocuses his attention on the student before him. Tina formally bows in a new dress, declaring that starting today she will be in his care as a student. Alan bids her good morning, surprised to see she isn't wearing her maid uniform. He teases her about forgetting her headband, prompting Tina to pout and call him a meanie. Tina suddenly raises her voice, demanding to say something first before they begin the lesson. She firmly reminds him that she is his student now and forbids him from using formal titles, insisting he call her Tina. Tina frets that calling him by name is too disrespectful and fears the Duke's scolding, but Alan dismisses her worry. He thinks calmly while she panics in a fluster. Alan sets a strict condition for their relationship, prohibiting her from ever lying to him. He prepares to move to the next topic without delay. Tina meets his gaze with fierce determination, demanding he never lie even if the truth causes pain. She declares she has the resolution to face reality. Alan stares at her, momentarily struck silent by the unexpected strength of her resolve. Bowing her head, Tina vows not to hide anything from him. Alan acknowledges her promise with a solemn nod. Watching her expression, Alan realizes she must have endured many hurtful lies in her past. Alan smiles gently, deciding that he will eventually teach her how to kick back and relax. Fidgeting with her dress, Tina hesitates before bringing up one final request regarding the end of their lessons. Blushing deeply, she asks that if she performs well, he must praise her for her efforts. Alan agrees immediately, stating that was his intention all along. Tina blinks in confusion, caught off guard by his easy acceptance. He explains that praise boosts morale and results, noting that aristocrats rarely compliment each other due to pride. Tina looks away shyly, mumbling that she doesn't need to ask because she naturally praises others often. Alan shifts gears, signaling that it is time to officially begin their session. He extends a hand, looking forward to working with her for the next 3 months. Tina grasps his hand firmly, echoing his sentiment with a soft agreement. Gazing at her, Alan reflects on his own life when he was just 13 years old. He wonders about the karma of his journey, noting he has come far in just 4 years. Deciding not to dwell on the headache-inducing past, he pushes the thoughts away. Tina nervously asks him to release her hand, breaking his trance. The narrative notes his new role as home tutor for the young Duchess. Alan apologizes for zoning out, but Tina blushes and admits she would have preferred the contact to last longer. Regaining his composure, Alan announces that today's goal is to evaluate Tina's capabilities. Tina tilts her head, questioning what he means by evaluating her capabilities. Alan confirms she knows the Royal Academy entrance exams consist of both a writing test and an interview. Tina slumps in defeat, admitting she is absolutely hopeless when it comes to the practical test. Alan stresses the importance of the writing exam and plans to gauge her academic level first. He decides they will devote the next 3 months to improving her practical skills as much as possible. Alan smiles and reveals he is holding this year's actual exam papers. Tina cries out in shock at the impossible claim. He explains that the Royal Academy revamps its writing exam annually, making it famously difficult to predict. Tina stares in disbelief, stammering that his claim cannot possibly be true. Alan wags a finger, explaining that even a kingdom-established school follows a pattern that repeats over decades or centuries. He blames the headmaster's long lifespan for the oversight in the pattern. Watching her stunned reaction, Alan thinks to himself that her variety of expressions is quite amusing. Ignoring her shock, he hands over the papers and instructs her to solve them immediately. Tina immediately switches modes, focusing intently as she begins to work through the test. Alan observes her diligence, noting how well she responds to the prospect of praise. Checking the results, Alan realizes he was the one caught off guard by her performance. As he marks the paper, he stares at the results, realizing the true caliber of this young lady. He smiles, acknowledging that she is just as talented as Lydia. Her score is nearly perfect, proving she is proficient even in the ancient Elvish he thought was petty harassment by the headmaster. He finally understands why the Duke is so reluctant to let such a genius go. Exhausted by the revelation, Alan flops down onto his bed to think. Staring at the ceiling, he wonders what course of action he should take next. He considers that following the Duke's request would mean forcing her to give up on the Royal Academy. However, he believes it is best for her to go to the capital and experience the outside world. Closing his eyes, he decides to defer the decision until after he sees her magic tomorrow. A small smile plays on his lips as he anticipates the fun tomorrow will bring. For the first time, he sleeps peacefully without his usual nightmare of failing the court magician exam. Alan announces the return of the exam papers, prompting a nervous stammer from the flustered maid standing beside her charge. Alan slides the graded test paper across the table toward the trembling student. Before reviewing the results, Alan turns to Ellie and politely requests that she go fetch something for him on an errand. Tina swallows hard in anticipation, her eyes fixed on the paper as dread pools in her stomach. She stares at the document, scanning the marks and corrections scrawled across the page with bated breath. A wave of relief washes over Tina, and she breaks into a bright, beaming smile upon realizing the news is good. Alan commends her capabilities, asserting that she will not only pass the writing exam but potentially rank first due to her brilliant essay. He adds that such talent is rare even in the capital, causing Tina to stammer a shy thank you while hiding her flushed face. Shifting gears, Alan declares that the writing preparation is sufficient and they must now focus entirely on her practical magic skills. Seeing Tina slump in depression at the mention of magic, Alan resolves to intervene and fix her terrible relationship with the art. Alan initiates the lesson by asking Tina to define exactly what magic is to her. Tina recites the standard theory, explaining that people are born with specific affinities for the 7 attributes like fire, water, and wind. She continues her explanation, noting that the founder Duke Howard used his dual mastery of water and wind to help build the kingdom. Alan interrupts to correct her, stating with a knowing smile that her answer is only half correct. He raises a finger, clarifying that what he is about to say is merely his own personal speculation. When Tina questions if the basic attributes were established by researchers ages ago, Alan confirms it but challenges her to define them. He asks her to analyze the temperature manipulation magic he used in the car, which she guesses involved fire, water, and wind. Alan explains that opposing attributes like fire and water are difficult to combine, meaning such magic is usually reserved for massive machines. He points out the absurdity of a single person wielding such complex industrial magic by themselves. Tina passionately retorts that it is only possible because Sensei is an amazing person. Laughing off the compliment, Alan reveals his mana is near the bottom and far less than hers, making advanced magic impossible for him. He instructs her to discard the notion of suitable attributes and instead experiment with various ones until something clicks. Drawing a parallel to her botany work, Alan urges her to approach magic with the same research mindset she applies to plants. He smiles encouragingly, stating that if she discovers an aptitude for fire or ice instead, they will simply celebrate that discovery. Tina looks at him in bewilderment, admitting that this is the first time anyone has ever suggested such a thing to her. She notes that common sense usually dictates studying the specific magic that manifests within one's household. Alan walks toward the bookshelf, recalling a naive question he asked himself when he was just a child. Tina suggests the answer lies in the fact that everyone possesses mana and has used it since ancient times. Alan posits that magic is simply borrowing something at the cost of mana, a definition Tina hesitantly accepts as true. He remembers being deeply impressed by the great magic described in the hero tales he read as a boy. The stories featured legends like the Saintess reviving the dead, the knight canceling magic, and the hero decapitating a dragon. Smiling at the memory, Alan admits that his younger self desperately wished to wield such powerful magic one day. Sitting alone in the dim light, Alan reflects on how magic research advanced over time while the users of great magic vanished entirely. He notes with a heavy heart that the number of mages capable of culmination magic, the tier just below greatness, has been steadily decreasing each year. Tina listens intently with a troubled expression, finally asking if he doesn't find that phenomenon incredibly weird. Alan points out that despite advancements in recording technologies like printing and jewels, the younger generation fails to inherit great magic. Countering his point, Tina argues that the constant threat of monsters and demons should be driving magical evolution. She insists that even without a major war in 2 centuries, military spending and economic growth provide ample opportunities to polish battle magic. Unmoved by her logic, Alan asserts that mankind's magic is nevertheless continuing to weaken. Tina concedes he has a point but tries to argue that new magic users are still appearing regularly. Alan predicts that advanced magic will decline if the trend continues, noting that the sheer power and scale of modern spells are already diminishing. He highlights that aside from exceptions like the flame bird, very few people in the capital can even conjure the signature magic of the Archduke houses. Connecting the dots, Tina realizes the grave implication behind his lecture and asks if this is what he is trying to say. Alan smiles and declares that the way humanity has learned magic until now is fundamentally wrong. He looks at her with a confident, knowing expression as the weight of his statement settles in. Praising her intuition, Alan confirms that she has reached the correct conclusion. Horrified, Tina asks if all the desperate improvements made since the battle against the Demon Lord were for nothing. Alan denies it was all for naught, but clarifies that the increase in quantity came at the severe expense of magical quality. He suggests it is natural to think that way given the numbers, but insists that something about the situation feels off. Overwhelmed by the paradigm shift, Tina clutches her head and admits she feels lightheaded. She struggles to process the information, stammering a weak protest as she tries to regain her composure. Despite her confusion, she resolves to believe everything simply because he is the one telling her. Looking up at him with total trust, she asks him directly what she should do next. Tina blushes and wonders aloud why she puts so much trust in him despite them having just met. She mumbles that he is amazing and cool, just like the professor and Lydia had described him. Alan freezes in panic as he thinks he hears concerning keywords like professor and Lydia, which he desperately tries to ignore. Clearing his throat loudly, he attempts to regain control of the conversation and move past the dangerous topic. He presents his theory that royalty and archdukes have specific attribute spirits connected to them, with mana acting as payment for their power. Tina immediately counters that his theory was debunked by a famous experiment conducted 100 years ago. Impressed by her knowledge, Alan praises her for having done her research thoroughly. He suddenly freezes with a look of shock, realizing he acted on reflex without thinking. Explaining that she reminds him of his sister, Alan apologizes for reflexively patting her and quickly pivots back to explaining fire magic. Tina blushes deeply, seemingly displeased that he stopped the head pat so abruptly. Alan asks her if she thinks fire spirits dwell in the ocean, to which she hesitantly replies no. She reasons that fire cannot exist inside water, so the spirits shouldn't be there either. Tina cries foul play, arguing that asking how spirits live is unfair when they can't even explain what spirits are. Laughing softly, Alan asks for forgiveness and admits he only teased her because she is such an excellent girl. Pouting at his playfulness, Tina grumbles that he is a meanie after all. Alan proposes that if spirits exist, attributes might have little meaning to them, finding it fun to discuss these ideas with her. He admits that proving the existence of spirits is difficult and that his theories have no concrete basis. Asking her to stand in their shoes, Alan questions if spirits would help humans who constantly force them to do the same tasks. He decides they have gone on a tangent for long enough and suggests they finally start the exercise. Tina grabs his sleeve, declaring she still cannot accept the situation despite his explanation. She demands he stop using formal language with her and insists on knowing why he pats Ellie but not her. Alan smiles nervously, internally admitting that he still cannot understand this girl's mind at all. Tina confronts Alan with a fierce glare, demanding to know right this instant why he pats Ellie's head but refuses to do the same for her. With a bright and demanding smile, she adds another condition, insisting that he stop using polite formal language when talking to her. Alan protests that he is already walking a tightrope by using her given name, explaining that as a mere commoner, he cannot be rude to a duke's daughter. Tina suddenly shifts the topic, asking about the rumor she heard regarding him frequently giving Miss Lydia head pats. She lists embarrassing details about them embracing without words, causing Alan to panic and shout that it is a huge misunderstanding. Realizing the professor is the source of these rumors, Alan defends his actions with Lydia as purely necessary measures of self-defense. Alan tries to turn the page of their book, but Tina clings tightly to his arm, refusing to let go while he wonders if she saw the text about his courage. Tina tugs at his sleeve with a pout, reminding him of his earlier promise that he would compliment her. She explicitly demands that he pat her often and treat her more gently, insisting on receiving the same treatment as Ellie. Alan sighs in defeat, agreeing to her terms with a resigned smile despite not fully understanding what she means by gentle. He points a finger and sets a condition, promising that if she performs well in the magic exercise, he will pat her until she is sick of it. Motivated by the reward, Tina burns with determination, declaring she feels capable of conjuring even an ice snow wolf right now. Alan scratches his head, noting that her motivation reminds him a little of Lydia's single-minded drive. Just then, Ellie arrives at the perfect moment, humming a tune as she approaches the table with a tray. Ellie presents a candelabra with several unlit candles, announcing she has brought the items he asked for. Alan thanks the maid with a smile, while Ellie curtsies politely in response to his gratitude. Watching her walk away, Alan's eyes narrow as he foresees a clumsy accident about to happen with her footwear. Exactly as predicted, Ellie's foot catches and she trips forward with a startled cry. Moving with lightning reflexes, Alan catches Ellie and the falling tray before they hit the ground, remarking that it was close. A single candle escapes the tray, but Alan calmly extends a hand and catches it midair with telekinetic magic. With a smooth motion, he uses magic to slot the falling candle back into the candelabra while still holding the maid. The candle settles perfectly into its holder with a soft clack, averting any damage. Ellie stares up at him with swirling eyes, completely flustered and unable to form coherent words in his arms. Tina interrupts the moment with a jealous fume, demanding he let go because Ellie looks like a frightened small animal. Losing her composure, Tina screams at him to release the maid this very instant. Alan complies with a casual response, while Tina pouts and calls him obscene for the embrace. He brushes off the feat as easy, while Ellie marvels that she has never seen anyone use levitation magic so effortlessly. Alan decides it is time to start the class, ignoring Tina's piercing stare as he refocuses on the lesson. He declares that they need to get back on track and begin the practical training immediately. Pointing to the candelabra, Alan explains the task is to strike different kinds of magic for each of the 7 attribute candles plus 1 for ice. Tina stares at the daunting task and mutters under her breath that Sensei is a meanie after all. Alan hears her complaint and calmly retorts that he is not a meanie, ready to begin the lesson. Alan encourages Tina, expressing his firm belief that she can achieve the goal set before her. Blushing deeply at the vote of confidence, Tina nods and quietly affirms that she understands the task. She accepts the challenge but immediately negotiates terms, demanding that hugs be added to the reward if she succeeds. With the terms set, Alan prepares to shift gears and begin the real work. While the girls cheer each other on, Alan privately worries that the odds are bad for Tina to master magic before the 3-month deadline. Before they begin, Alan pauses to ask Tina a serious question about something he heard from Ellie. He probes if she truly wants to go to the Royal Academy, prompting Tina to recall the insults of those who called her an incompetent lowlife. Tina stands firm against the painful memories, declaring with absolute certainty that attending the academy is her own wish. Alan watches her closely, his expression softening as he takes in her resolve. She reiterates her desire, making it clear that this path is one she has chosen for herself. Alan suggests she has the option to stay and continue her research, noting how much she loves her plants and the greenhouse. Tina admits that while she loves seeing new seeds bud, there is something else driving her. She nervously asks Alan to promise not to laugh at her reason, and he solemnly agrees. Tina reveals that ever since her mother read her tales of heroes, she has dreamed of using magic just like them. Without a word, Alan gently places his hand on her head, offering silent comfort and acknowledgement. Tina stammers in confusion at the sudden affection, but Alan ignores her fluster and abruptly starts the lesson. He calls for their attention to brief them on the exercise, and Ellie responds with enthusiastic energy. Pointing to the candelabra, Alan instructs them to use a different attribute of magic to light each of the 8 candles. He asks Ellie if she can use fire magic, causing Tina to complain that she is being ignored when he focuses on the maid. Ellie tenses up as she steps forward, but Alan gently coaches her to relax and just focus on lighting the wick. With a small burst of concentration, the candle flares to life under Ellie's magic. Ellie admits she can only use a little fire and wind magic, but Alan praises her success and asks for water next. Realizing her limitations, Alan adjusts the request and asks her to produce wind instead. Ellie nods nervously and raises her hands to attempt the second spell. Alan praises her for using 2 different magics right from the start, telling a beaming Ellie that her future is bright. Tina watches in shock, stunned that the maid is receiving such high praise. Her confidence crumbles as she reminds herself she cannot use magic at all, but Alan calls her up next regardless. He challenges her to prove her earlier claim that she could do anything, warning that he cannot teach her if she doesn't try. Tina steels herself, accepting the challenge with a serious nod. She focuses intensely, channeling her energy toward the candles, but despite the visible effort, nothing ignites. Alan observes the perfect flow of mana and exemplary formula construction, even as Tina apologizes for her failure. He smiles and tells her not to apologize, assuring her he knows she has mana and they just need to find the blockage. Tina slumps in dejection, the failure weighing heavily on her despite his words. She murmurs that she doesn't doubt him, and Alan playfully teases her to lift the mood. Internally, Alan notes her complex caused by previous tutors but remains confident that her high talent for formulas will eventually break through. He clasps his hands together, telling them he wants them to accomplish this together as he prepares a demonstration. Deciding that basic spells are too boring, Alan resolves to show them something much more noteworthy. He thinks to himself that magic is not difficult once you know the trick, while the girls watch in anticipation. Chanting an incantation, Alan activates the spell, proving to himself that even a former incompetent can do it. Alan begins a letter to his beloved Lydia. Noting that he is sending this one to her home address assuming she hasn't returned from her parents, he apologizes for the sudden correspondence before diving into the difficult news he must share. Alan confesses that despite his best efforts and perfect written exam scores, he failed the admittance exam to become a royal court magician. Anticipating her questions, he prepares to offer his own analysis of why he was rejected. He admits that a mishap during the interview likely exposed his poor skills, leading to the failure. Filled with regret, he asks for forgiveness for meaninglessly taking up her time with his training. To earn train fare back to his hometown, he reveals he has taken a job as a home tutor at Duke Howard's manor. He introduces his new students, the exclusive maid Ellie Walker and the Duke's second daughter Tina Howard, describing them as very cute girls. Recalling the moment of his rejection, a cold official dismisses him, promising only to write again in the future. Alan pleads with Lydia to go easy on his heartbroken self when they meet, asking her not to greet him with a flaming bird spell. Back in the present, Alan tries to soothe a trembling Ellie, assuring her the process will be over before she realizes it. Ellie stammers a nervous response, overwhelmed by the proximity of her teacher. She flinches violently as Alan reaches out to steady her hands. Alan holds her hands firmly, asking if she can feel the sensation while waiting for her to calm down. The student notes with surprise that his hands are warmer than she expected. Alan shifts his attention to a black cat, praising Ellie for successfully feeling the flow of mana through the familiar. He pats Ellie on the head, commending her good work while she blushes and stammers her thanks. A loud cough interrupts the tender moment as someone demands attention. Tina stands behind them, radiating a menacing aura of jealousy and rage. She snaps at them, screaming at her teacher and maid to stop getting so close to each other. Tina accuses them of flirting while pretending to train, though Ellie quietly admits she didn't hate the closeness. Turning bright red, Tina demands that Alan pat her more as well, unable to hide her envy. Alan looks at her with a knowing smile, seeing right through her demand. Instead of Tina, he resumes petting the black cat, Anko-san, the professor's familiar who demands more affection. Alan marvels that the cat managed to reach the mansion before him, wondering when it arrived in his room. He explains that touching Anko-san allows them to experience the flow of darkness mana and decides to put it into practice. He calls on Ellie to go first, and she steps up with a nervous shout. Ellie extends her hands toward the candles, attempting to channel the darkness magic she just learned. Her hands tremble visibly as the magic fails to activate, leaving her shaken. Seeing her distress, Alan reassures her that it's okay for a first attempt and encourages her to touch the cat again to refresh the feeling. Alan calls on Tina next, and she responds with a determined shout. Tina throws her arms back, striking a dramatic pose to prepare herself for the task. Alan sweats, thinking she really doesn't need to be that nervous about it. He realizes she is hyper-aware of his gaze, making the situation even more tense. Tina takes deep, exaggerated breaths to calm her racing heart. With a shout of, "Here I go," she thrusts her hands forward to begin the spell. She focuses intensely, constructing the magic formula with precise movements. Alan observes her work, impressed by the brilliant, textbook-perfect construction of her formula. Tina strains with effort, sweat beading on her face as she pushes her mana. Despite the elaborate preparation and perfect form, nothing happens, leaving only a silent void. Tears swell in Tina's eyes as the overwhelming weight of her failure threatens to break her spirit. Alan gently comforts her, promising they will take their time to try various methods since he is there to teach her magic. Internally, Alan analyzes the situation, suspecting an external factor like a curse or jamming magic given her perfect formula construction. He asks if she senses Anko's mana, and Tina confirms she feels a strange sensation she assumes is darkness. Alan encourages her, explaining that while light and darkness are difficult to wield, her ability to sense it proves she can possibly use it. Hope returns to Tina's expression as she processes his words, her determination slowly rekindling. Alan prepares to demonstrate darkness magic, but Tina hastily forbids him from using the flower spell again while he begins petting Anko. He mutters that it is a pain to cast with his hands occupied but proceeds to channel magic through the cat regardless. Dark energy swells around Anko as Alan activates the spell, splitting the shadows into multiple living forms. Tina and Ellie gasp in amazement, stunned that he performed such a complex feat so easily. 3 shadow cats materialize and begin frolicking around the room, prompting excited reactions from the girls. Alan holds one of the shadow kittens, catching Tina's attention as she stammers his name in awe. Jealousy flares instantly as Tina complains that it isn't fair for Ellie to have all the fun and demands to hold one too. Alan generates more kittens to diffuse the situation, handing one to each girl with a smile. The girls cuddle the shadow constructs, marveling that they feel warm and fluffy just like real kittens. Alan explains that the high quality comes from using Anko as a model, warning them not to misunderstand his ability to create life. He tries to steer the lesson forward, observing that the 2 girls look like a pair of good sisters. His attempt to resume class is met with silence as the girls remain completely captivated by the cats. Defeated, Alan sighs and allows them to keep playing, noting that the shadow kittens will last for half a day. Later that night, the sound of a key turning in a lock breaks the silence of the manor. Alan steps into the Duke's library, carrying a lantern into the dark room. He ignites the lantern with a small spell, recalling the conversation where he requested access to this place. In the flashback, the Duke asks if this request is for Tina, and Alan confirms he needs to consult books predating the Demon Lord War. Alan explains his theory that something inside Tina is hindering her magic, likely a hex that previous tutors failed to notice. The Duke listens gravely as Alan asserts that current-era magicology cannot solve her condition. Alan formally requests permission to search the library's ancient texts, promising not to neglect his teaching duties. Granting permission, the Duke warns Alan not to ruin his health lest Tina get angry, and orders Graham to hand over the key. Back in the present, moonlight streams through the tall windows of the silent library. Alan glances at books on cultural assets, tempted to read them but forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. He searches the shelves for texts older than 200 years, noting he has already exhausted the collections at the Royal Academy. A sudden creak on the floorboards interrupts his search, alerting him to another presence. Alan whips around in surprise, his eyes widening as he senses someone behind him. He spots a figure lurking in the shadows between the bookshelves, clutching a bottle. Tension rises as Alan stares down the intruder, his expression shifting to one of wariness. A mysterious voice calls out from the darkness, demanding to know who comes there so late at night. Sherry warns Tina to finish her business quickly before the master notices the key is missing. Fearing that Graham will scold the head maid, Tina agrees to hurry and understands the risk. Tina hums softly to herself as she scans the rows of books for her target. With a triumphant noise, she pulls down the Encyclopedia of Magicology from the shelf. From the shadows, Alan observes the scene, silently watching Her Highness and the head maid. He marvels that someone else actually reads that book, noting he was the only one at his university who did. Sherry comments that Tina closely resembles her late mother, who was also a studious book lover with a passion for magic. Tina smiles happily at the comparison, but her expression dims as she whispers that she cannot use magic. Changing the subject, Sherry mentions the remarkable new teacher, causing Tina to pout and call him a meanie. Softening, Tina clutches the book and admits that despite his teasing, he is a very kind person who believes in her. Sherry smiles warmly at the young mistress and instructs her to return to her room so she can lock up. Tina thanks her maid and scampers off, leaving Sherry alone in the library. Silence fills the room until the sharp sound of footsteps breaks the quiet. Alan steps into the light with a serious expression, stating calmly that he knows someone is lurking there. He calls out to the hidden presence, demanding they reveal themselves. Internally, Alan analyzes the unseen figure, realizing this is no ordinary maid he is dealing with. He notes she has absolutely no openings in her stance and her walking gait is identical to Graham's. Sherry steps out from the shadows, acknowledging with a smile that he found her. Raising her hands in surrender, she points out that he didn't even try to hide his approach. She introduces herself formally as Sherry Walker, the head maid, and states she has something to ask him. Alan introduces himself in return, and Sherry admits she stayed behind specifically to meet him even if Tina hadn't come. She decides to cut straight to the chase, warning that lingering too long will raise suspicion. Sherry declares that she wishes to explain what kind of person Tina is to the household and ask him a favor. Alan listens intently, his expression serious as he waits for her request. She reveals that previous tutors denied Tina everything purely because she lacked magic, ignoring her brilliant contributions to botany. Sherry describes the heartbreak of seeing Tina cry in secret every time she was rejected, burying herself in sorrow. The staff painfully concluded that she would be better off giving up on the capital to avoid further suffering. However, Tina refuses to abandon her wish to enroll in the Royal Academy, possessing talent that Sherry calls a national treasure. Sherry looks directly at Alan, marking his arrival as the turning point for the household. She describes seeing Tina genuinely smile for the first time in months, dropping the facade of cheerfulness she wore to protect them. Sherry explains that Tina looks up to Alan and the Sword Princess as her beacons of hope. Tears stream down the headmaid's face as she bows and begs Alan to save her young mistress, insisting he is the only one who can. Alan offers his assurance that Tina will surely be able to use magic, stating that teaching her is the very reason he is there. Sherry accepts his words but hesitantly admits there is one more thing she would like to ask him. She begins with a terrifying threat that he must defeat her and the master before laying a hand on Tina, but quickly clarifies she actually wants to ask about Miss Ellie. Alan recoils in shock, stammering to ask if the girl has acted rudely towards him. Tears form in Sherry's eyes as she explains that Ellie is their precious, one and only grandchild, and they couldn't face her late parents if they raised her wrong. She confirms with a solemn nod that this fear is exactly what she meant. Alan looks at her, confused by the sudden heavy turn in the conversation. He urges Sherry and Graham to personally tell Ellie how much they treasure her, while declaring that they can leave her highness to him. Sherry admits that although Ellie has more than enough talent, she lacks confidence and tends to cower. She laments that while she can teach magic and academics, she cannot give Ellie the familial love she needs, fearing their affection hasn't been enough. Looking directly at him, Sherry asserts that only Alan and Tina can provide that specific support in this world. With a graceful bow, the head maid excuses herself, leaving Alan to process the weight of her request. Alan sighs heavily as the door closes, complaining that the road ahead is hard and already way above what the professor offered. A sudden realization strikes him, freezing him in place with a look of horror. He bursts into hysterical laughter, realizing the professor knew everything and still gave him this job, cursing the bastard for setting him up. Far away in a garden, a beautiful woman sits elegantly at a table, holding a letter in her hands. A knowing smile plays on her lips as she reads the contents. The letter is addressed affectionately to a certain blockhead. Lydia notes that she received his overdue letter and deduces he must have used the state-owned mail service to purposely delay its arrival. Despite having many things to say, she demands that he answer one specific question first. She questions why he is at the Howard household in the freezing north when he hates the cold and it is warm in the south. Frustrated, she yells that he should have been there teaching her sister instead of running off. Lydia recalls meeting Tina at dinner parties and wonders if her case is too hard even for him. However, she expresses her belief that he could still solve it if he used that method. Her expression darkens as she warns him that the method is prohibited, threatening to burn him to ashes if he uses it on a child. Shifting gears, she admits she still can't believe he failed the Royal Court Magician exam and demands to know what happened in the arena. She questions if he was joking about his skill, pointing out that not even the crooked headmaster or the professor can best him. A memory of a massive lightning strike flashes through the narrative, hinting at the true events of the exam. Lydia accuses him of hiding major facts from his master and vows to force the truth out of him for his own safety. Resigned to his absence, she decides to enjoy her vacation at home since he won't be returning to the capital for a while. Back at the manor, Sherry and Graham don masks, preparing for a dramatic confrontation. The masked servants strike a dynamic pose, challenging Alan to meet them before the entrance exam or face death if he tries to escape. A black cat lounges on a cushion next to a note signed by Lydia, identifying herself as Alan's tracker and master. The postscript demands a weekly letter sent via the expensive Griffin mail service, regardless of his circumstances. Alan groans in despair as the weight of her unreasonable demands crushes his spirit. He visualizes Lydia's fury, knowing she will hunt him down with flaming bird spells if he fails to harden his resolve. Panic sets in as he realizes he cannot explain the true reason for his exam failure to her. Tina and Ellie interrupt his internal crisis, terrified that the letter means he is returning to the capital immediately. Alan quickly composes himself, realizing his sighing is causing unnecessary worry for his students. He reassures the girls that he was merely being scolded by Lydia and has no intention of leaving. Ellie is flabbergasted by the extravagance, noting the astronomical cost of using Griffin mail for a simple letter. Alan sweats nervously, wondering where a normal citizen like him is supposed to find the money for such a premium service. He realizes Lydia likely considers the cost trivial, dismissing a few weeks' worth of fees as nothing to complain about. Resigned to his fate, Alan accepts that this is simply the kind of person she is. Tina blushes and remarks that Lydia is lonely without him, but happily claims Alan as their sensei now. Ellie looks on with sparkling eyes, impressed that someone as high status as Lydia thinks so highly of their teacher. Alan privately grumbles that despite the praise, Lydia's personality is far from cute. He tucks the troublesome letter away to refocus on the task at hand. 20 days into his tenure, Alan declares the break over, noting that the students' results have consistently improved. Ellie responds with a bright, energetic smile, ready to resume her training. Alan confirms the progress is substantial, though he notes internally that it is mainly Ellie who is advancing. He reflects that Ellie has mastered the basics and passed the written mock exam, while Tina has never had academic problems. Alan announces they will practice the magic formulas from yesterday, mentioning that the next steps are the practical test and interview. Ellie claps her hands together, focusing her mana to cast the requested spells. Alan applauds her performance, praising her huge improvement in fire, earth, and wind attributes. He suggests asking Anko-san for help again, as darkness is the hardest concept to grasp compared to the others. Ellie agrees enthusiastically, and Alan notes with satisfaction that she is gaining confidence and cheerfulness. Tina steps forward for her turn, facing the candelabra with her back to the teacher. The candle remains stubbornly unlit as wind rushes past it without igniting a flame. Alan narrows his eyes, thinking that the situation is weird no matter how he looks at it. He observes that her magic is being repelled before it can even form, unlike before when she could momentarily deploy a formula. Tina strains against the invisible block, letting out a small sound of exertion. A sparkle materializes in the air near her face as something begins to manifest. Alan watches in confusion as particles drift down from the air around her. He catches the falling particles in his hand and is shocked to realize they are ice shards. He flips open a magic tome, reading a spell for curing hangovers with a sense of dry amusement. Sighing, he recalls how often he relied on that spell for Lydia, dismissing the information since he already knows the drinking age is 16. He shoves the book back onto the shelf, frustrated that his search for a solution is yielding nothing useful. Climbing a library ladder, he ruminates on Tina's struggles, noting that neither standard spells nor mixed attribute formulas have worked for her. His thoughts drift to Ellie, who has improved enough to handle both magical disciplines without issue. He frantically flips through pages, convinced something is interfering with Tina's magic, though he rules out curses. Despite being stumped with the exam days away, he clings to the fact that her ice magic works right up until the moment of execution. He focuses intensely on the anomaly, realizing Tina herself hasn't noticed the strange nature of the ice shards. He determines that deciphering the mystery of those shards is the key to breaking through her magical block. The silence of the library is broken by the heavy sound of the door creaking open. He peeks around a bookshelf, surprised to hear his name whispered in the quiet room. Ellie stands in the doorway, illuminated by a lantern and dressed in her maid uniform. She explains she was heading to her room after work when she spotted him, asking if he is on patrol. She hesitates, fidgeting nervously as she struggles to voice her request. Nervously, she asks for a moment of his time, admitting she knows such a meeting is technically prohibited. Internally, he smiles, pleased to see that she is finally becoming more assertive. He notes with satisfaction that her demeanor is becoming much more cheerful and open. She serves him warm tea, apologizing for the delay as he settles in. He looks at her concern, asking what is wrong since her expression seems tense. He thanks her for the tea and invites her to sit down beside him. She sits primly on the edge of the sofa, responding with a quiet affirmative. Turning serious, he tells her she is a charming lady and must be more aware of her safety. She interrupts him mid-lecture, but he insists on continuing his serious warning. To his shock, she demands to know why he has started adding the formal sen to her name. Panic sets in as he realizes he's been busted, and she points out he used to use her given name freely. He agrees to drop the honorific, causing her to cry out that he is cruel for trying to distance himself. He sighs at her dramatic reaction as she instantly cheers up, begging him to always call her that way. Returning to the topic at hand, he asks her to listen to his original warning again. He lectures her strictly on safety, warning her never to invite men, even him, into her bedroom late at night unless it's the one her heart chooses. Ellie looks up at him, her eyes widening as she processes the implication of his words. She smiles softly, declaring that there is absolutely no problem then. Flustered by her bold implication, he stammers his understanding while she innocently tries to change the subject. Ellie timidly asks if she can visit his room when thunder roars or on scary nights. Tears form in her eyes as she anxiously questions if such a request is forbidden. Alan relents, agreeing to allow her into his room during those specific times of fear. She cheers with delight, quickly adding that they must keep this arrangement a secret from Her Highness for now. Alan sighs that she oscillates between resembling his little sister and a scheming adult, finding girls scary before she questions his mention of Her Highness. Deciding to cut to the chase, he is interrupted when Ellie lets out a sudden sneeze. She stammers his name, hesitating as she tries to gather her thoughts. Bowing her head, she offers him a sincere thank you. Alan confesses that he lied about being on patrol earlier that evening. Ellie admits she knew he was lying because her grandmother told her his routine, so she waited for him after hearing about the library meeting. He attempts to deflect by claiming they were just having a light chat, accusing her of lying about the encounter. She reveals that her grandparents suddenly called her yesterday to speak with her. They hugged her tightly, affirming she is family and that they love her more than anything, not just as their daughter's child. Alan smiles that it is great, noting their love should have been obvious given how they reacted during the storm. Ellie explains that they claimed Alan scolded them for not showing their feelings through words and actions. He denies scolding them, insisting it was advice while internally noting that Ellie lacks independence and is too shy unlike Tina. He reflects that she would break down in the royal capital without knowing she is loved, just like he once did. Softening his expression, he tells her that he is genuinely glad for her reconciliation. He gently places his hand on her head, offering her a comforting pat. Ellie closes her eyes, basking in the warmth of his touch. Alan asks if he can shift the conversation to talk about himself for a little while. He reveals his parents were doctors who died in the royal capital after getting infected by a widespread pandemic. He recalls that the tragedy occurred during the 10-day fever pandemic 10 years ago. Although he heard his grandfather oppose their move, he admits he cannot remember his parents' voices or what they liked. His oldest memory is the cold whiteness of the snow from when his grandfather took him in after they left. He pauses, letting the memory of that time linger in the silence. He recalls the image of a little girl who frantically chased after his footsteps back then. He notes that he and the girl were alike, as she was also feeling uneasy after just losing her mother. Alan looks down tenderly at Ellie, who listens quietly by his side. She smiles, reminiscing that she used to be like a big sister to Tina, though now Tina is the one watching over her. Teasingly, she calls him a meanie just like Tina said, though her tone is gentle. Closing her eyes, she whispers that he is warm-hearted and that she is really happy to have met him. Ellie bows her head in gratitude, whispering that she is truly honored to hear such kind words from him. Alan leans in with a gentle smile, assuring her that she is not alone and possesses great talent if she just takes the first step. She giggles softly, amused by his earlier reference to her as a little girl, despite her position. He corrects himself with a warm expression, acknowledging that she is indeed a responsible big sister after all. Overcome with emotion, Ellie reaches out towards him, calling his name as she leans forward on the sofa. She confesses her past fears, admitting she was terrified of becoming the heiress and never thought she could match her grandparents. Feeling displaced in her own home, she reveals how Tina surpassed her academically in no time, leaving her feeling inadequate. Alan recalls that while he thought her tutoring was Graham's idea, it was actually Ellie who gathered the courage to ask for it herself. He affirms her strength, telling her directly that she is a courageous girl for making that choice. Grasping her hands tightly, he thanks her for opening her own path and allowing them to meet. Ellie asks if she can continue to do her best alongside him and Her Highness moving forward. She hesitates for a moment before shyly asking if she can request just one specific thing from him. After biting her tongue in nervousness, she manages to ask him to hug her once she successfully enters the Royal Academy with Tina. Alan smiles broadly at her confidence, promising to fulfill her request while noting she has zero doubt about Tina's acceptance. He decides it is time to leave, prompting a flustered stamina from Ellie as he stands up. Before exiting, he gently pats her head and compliments the delicious tea, leaving her with encouragement for tomorrow. Left alone in the room, Ellie buries her face in a cushion, overwhelmed by her racing heart. Alan steps out into the hallway, closing the doors softly behind him. He walks down the corridor, but a sudden ominous aura stops him in his tracks as he senses a threat. Graham and Sherry emerge from the shadows with terrifying expressions, glowing with menacing intent. They declare with deadly seriousness that he will have to cross their dead bodies before laying a hand on their granddaughter. Panic-stricken, Alan tries to defend himself by pointing out that he is literally just holding a book. The sun rises on a snowy morning, signaling the start of a new day. Alan greets his student with a beaten face, laughing awkwardly as he praises the grandparents' close-quarters combat skills. Tina stares at his injuries in shock, though he insists it looks worse than it actually is. She rushes to fetch ointment, concerned by the visible damage on his face. Returning with a sharp gaze, she demands to know if something happened between him and Ellie to cause this. Alan admits they talked a little but denies anything else, claiming he has no reason to lie about it. He internally resolves to keep the previous night's chaos a secret to protect Ellie's honor. Ellie bursts into the room with tea but trips, sending the tray flying in a panic. Alan catches her in a smooth dip, experiencing a strong sense of déjà vu as he tells her to take it easy. Blushing furiously, she asks if he will always catch her, to which he replies she needs to calm down first. The two stammer awkwardly at each other, trying to regain their composure after the close contact. Ellie gazes up at him with wide eyes, asking if she can speak with him again later. He smiles gently, patting her head as he agrees, reminding her that he is her teacher after all. Tina watches the interaction with a serious expression before declaring that it is time to begin the lesson.